Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the New Human Movement. There are not many CEOs who've had the guts to challenge the bureaucratic status quo, who've really set off on what is often a very difficult, arduous journey to kind of unwind bureaucracy and build something else in its place. Many of the examples of companies that we have that have radically new management models were, as Lady Gaga says, born that way. Well, today we're going to have an amazing conversation with Bill Anderson, who's the CEO of Roche Pharmaceuticals. Roche is the world's largest biotech company. It's made an extraordinary difference in the lives of millions of patients around the world in oncology, immunology, infectious diseases, ophthalmology, and other areas as well. It is a fantastically performing organization. Bill is a member of Roche's executive committee, and he oversees all of the pharmaceutical efforts at Roche. He has degrees from University of Texas and MIT, and we're going to talk to Bill about his story, the insights that led him to say it's time to set off on a very different course. So, Bill, welcome and thanks a ton for being our guest today.
Thanks, Gary. Thanks, Michele. Great to be here.
So, Bill, let me start with kind of maybe a more provocative question, and that we didn't warn you about, but it's not a gotcha. I'm just curious. I've heard you talk about changing the way large organizations work, but let me start with a question like, do we really need large organizations? I was looking at some data around the drug industry, and what you see if you look over the last few years is many of the new drugs that are coming to market came out of relatively small organizations whose probably total revenue was less than the R&D budget of many of the big pharma majors. And then when you talk to people in pharma, I came across this wonderful quote from Roger Perlmutter, who was the president of Merck Research. He said, if I could just scrape off the top 5 levels, like everything would get better. Or another great pharma researcher, Pedro Quattrocacas, who worked at Warner Lambert, Pfizer, and he said this, and I just want to see if this resonates. He said, freedom, spontaneity, flexibility, nimbleness, tolerance, compassion, humor, diversity. These things got replaced in our organizations by bulky, inflexible structures characterized by regimentation, control, conformity, and excessive, bureaucracy. So I don't know if any of that rings true, but do we really need these large organizations? And I think you're going to tell us yes, but I'm curious how you'd answer that.
Well, one thing's for sure is we don't need dinosaurs. There are some special things that can be accomplished with a large company like Roche. And let me just give you a couple examples. One is, so Roche is the largest cancer therapeutics company in the world. We're also the largest diagnostics company in the world. And we've been able to, through that combination of pharmaceutical and diagnostic innovation, we've been able to really transform the way cancer is treated with pairing diagnostics and medicines. So originally with companion diagnostics, now we also, part of the Roche Group is Foundation Medicine, which has molecular targeted medicine for every cancer. So, every person's cancer is different, just like your fingerprint is different. And we can actually, read that fingerprint and identify the most appropriate medicine for each individual cancer patient. These are the kinds of things that you can combine and you can make available in 130 countries in the world. You can't do that with a startup. Not with a physical product. You might be able to do that with an app, but it's a whole nother thing. So I think that's one example. Another example would be look in the pandemic and just look at the quantities of various things that have been provided. And for example, Roche, we have 2 of the therapeutics that are approved to treat COVID. There's only, I don't know, what are there, 3 or 4 in the world? 2 of them are ones that we have. We're selling them in dozens of countries. I mean, we were able to do that because we have a large organization with large manufacturing capabilities. We were able to stand that up in a hurry. It's not so easy for a startup.
So Bill, so you say that, we can just bring a level of expertise, a depth of wisdom, a geographic footprint that perhaps is going to be challenging for others to do. Having said that, kind of the data is the data. So what it suggests is there's a lot that's getting in the way. You use the word achievement a lot. I want to come back to that. There's a lot that's getting in the way of achievement in these large organizations. So we're talking to you today, Bill. You're up just south of San Francisco. I'm here on the edge of the Silicon Valley, and the people in Silicon Valley, they would tell you that you just can't expect large companies to really be nimble and quick and even very innovative. That as you get bigger, you just get more layers, more bureaucracy, more controls, more specialized, and this is like as inevitable as aging and senescence and so on. And so you could argue that the failure of large companies to innovate and be quick is basically what allows Silicon Valley to exist. So I don't think you believe that, do you?
Well, I certainly believe that is the natural course of things, that companies, as they get larger, and by the way, you don't have to have thousands of employees to get bureaucratic. You can get bureaucratic with 500 employees. In fact, I've had in my career the opportunity to work with companies that were growing from 100 to 500 to 1,000 to 1,500. It's really interesting. It does seem like the bureaucracy and the bureaucratic instinct kicks in somewhere there between a few hundred and 1,000. All of a sudden, we need to bring in the professional managers. We need to set up professional functions. We need to specialize. We need to, it's all the things that stifle innovation and frankly that make jobs not that fun and not that interesting. And but the point is, but it doesn't have to be that way. And I think we're all aware of, there's a number of large enterprises in the world, but it's a number. It's like handfuls. It's not dozens or hundreds, but there's a number of large enterprises. You could say, take Amazon as an example. Are they slow and bureaucratic? I don't think so. So it's not inevitable, but it's almost inevitable. And that's why we're having this conversation, I think.
Yeah, it's not inevitable. Definitely the default setting. Now, so that raises the question. As you say, there are just a handful, I would say, of these organizations around the world that somehow seem to be able to can take advantage of the scale and the size, but have avoided kind of the bureaucratic trap. So in other words, there's not a lot of role models. So let's go back, Bill, I think it was 5 or 6 years ago when you started this transformation journey at Roche Pharmaceuticals. First of all, what was it that you saw? What were you getting frustrated or even pissed off with, right? What did you see that you wanted to change? Question number one. Question number two, how did you build, because I'm sure you didn't see the whole journey at that point. You didn't have the whole thing laid out. So how did you build some commitment and some energy to tackle something that probably everybody else said, well, this is just the way it is. We can trim this at the margins, but Bill, like this is life. So where did the frustration or desire come from? And then both maybe up to, your board and then through how did you get people kind of like, okay, let's go, let's try this.
Yeah. I think I'm almost going to answer both your questions with the same sort of story. I was newly appointed as CEO. I decided I'm going to make the rounds, find out, how do people feel? What do people feel could be better? I had an impression coming in that things were basically good. We had been one of the most successful companies in the industry, certainly most innovative, the most number of breakthrough drug designations by the FDA. I mean, a lot of metrics that were successful metrics. In addition, in the employee engagement surveys and things, we had very high scores. Right. So I'm kind of thinking, well, this is all good. So I'm going to talk to people. So I had groups with first line managers, group with senior executives, new employees, you name it, all kinds of different groups. They all said the same thing. And that really blew me away. And here's what they said. We love the mission, of more advances for patients. We love that. We love the science focus. We love our colleagues. We love the supportive culture. I can't get anything done. Can you fix that, Bill? And honestly, I thought they had all compared notes and, like, hey, let's all tell Bill the same thing. It didn't matter where I went. I heard the same thing. And if I hadn't been a veteran of the company at that point, I'd already been with the company for 10 years, I probably would have thought, hey, it sounds like we got some bureaucracy. We need to do some bureaucracy busting. So let's get some teams of people and tell them to go and fight bureaucracy. Here's the problem. I'd been with the company for 10 years, and we had done nothing but that for 10 years. So I'm thinking, whoa, this is a problem. I mean, the very thing we've been fighting against is literally strangling us. And people gave me story after story of basically they knew the thing that needed to be done and they just couldn't do it. Too many.
Let me just interrupt there for a minute, because before you go forward in the story, take us back a minute. So you said, like, it wasn't that people were unmindful of the fact that, like, things are too slow, there's too many barriers in the way, there's too many layers of approval, and you're saying in some way they had been fighting that, but it sounds like not very effectively. How do you diagnose that?
Well, specific example, take budgets. Everyone agreed, wow, we spend way too much time forecasting, budgeting, target setting. For people, once you got past the first line of management, that was practically their biggest part of their job. 12 months a year, okay? Over time, and by that point, I'd been working for 25 years, what I'd seen is companies would have a big initiative. Hey, we're going to shrink the budget process. From it's taking 6 months, we're going to shrink it to 4 months. Then 4 years later, guess what? It's 7 months, right? And I'd seen this movie played several times. Like, what's going on here? Another anecdote: we did this culture survey about what's the culture of the company, and we found that there was a lot of things like pleasing, belonging, conforming, don't take risks. Right. Then we did the same survey, but we asked people to rate their managers, and especially the senior managers. And what we found was just the opposite: courageous, bold, risk taking. And so we're like, how can this be? How can it be that we have leaders who are bold and courageous, and we have a culture that is risk averse and all about pleasing, right? And the answer is, and this was sort of the shocking answer, the leaders are not in control of the system. The system is controlling the leaders. That if people say, it's one thing if a frontline employee says, I can't get anything done. But when a senior vice president says, I can't get anything done, what do you do with that, Gary? And you have to realize, hey, there's something deeply wrong in this system. I likened it to the scene in Space Odyssey when he realizes that Hal, the computer, is not his friend, and it was like that. It was a realization, hey, this system is crushing us, and we have to slay the beast. It can't be like, oh, we're going to create a little team that's going to go off and come up with some bureaucracy busting ideas. We have to start over.
So, it's interesting. I've used that kind of metaphor that, we kind of fiddle at the margins, right? We occasionally we try to kick bureaucracy in the shins when, like, what we need to give it is a knockout punch. But I want to take you back and just dig into the dynamics here a minute, because obviously bureaucracy is not alive, right? It's not like the alien that's searching through the ship and trying to kill people. And it doesn't advance, absent human intention. So I'm just curious, what do you think is that dynamic where you take it from 6 months back to 4 months, and then pretty soon it's 7 months? I mean, it seems perverse, but I think many, many people would identify that, this thing almost seems to have its own self-propagation characteristics.
Yes. I mean, I'm sure you could write books about what causes this. But there is something that happens in human organizations beyond a handful. Even in a team, like Gary, and Michele, I'm sure you guys are familiar with all this research around what's the best team size. And it turns out, at least in my read, it's somewhere between 4 and 7, right? Once you get above 7, not only do you have diminishing returns, you have negative returns. And so, how do you explain that? There's just something about people's social behaviors of again, wanting to belong, wanting to not stick out, not wanting to be annoying to others, kind of going with the flow. And when you put that in an organization with 7 or 8 layers of hierarchy and a lot of specialization, and then you have all this kind of pleasing behavior and belonging behaviors, it just creates this toxic mix that it's like quicksand. People just sink in it, and the work multiplies and the output goes down.
Bill, I wanted to go back to something you said, which was that the engagement level was at 84%. So 84% of people polled indicated they were highly engaged at work at Roche, right? And yet, in private conversations with you, they mentioned that they couldn't get any work done, or there was a lot of barriers to them being productive. So, how did you square that kind of dissonance? How are people reconciling those two things?
Well, I hope for some of the listeners, this is a convicting statement. I think we had gotten too good at public relations, at sort of at PR. So what we did was we told people, hey, Gary, Michele, you're empowered. We focus on empowering our people. So we're going to send you off to meetings, and you're going to go and have really interesting conversations with interesting people where you decide things like, how are we going to approach our bosses for approval? How are we going to handle governance? And when's the next meeting where we can talk about what our bosses said we could and couldn't do and what we might do? And oh, by the way, but you're empowered. Did I tell you you're empowered? And so I call that fake empowerment. We tell people, oh, we have an empowering culture, we have a supportive culture, but people, follow people's actions. Are they empowered? Can they see an opportunity? Think about it, talk to some friends, make a decision, act, and see a result. That is empowerment. People spending their lives in meetings where they can talk about how to navigate governance, that is not empowerment. And the fact that we didn't have managers who yelled at people does not make it an empowering environment. But I honestly, we put a lot of energy into positive vibes, but we put a lot less energy into unsticking work. But that's all changed. That was 5 years ago, and I think we've learned a lot. And it's not that we're not done by a long shot, but we've put a lot of that behind us.
But I mean, one of the things that I'm so glad Michele asked that question, because one of the things that has been, again, kind of a dissonance for us is in many of these very traditional hierarchical organizations, the engagement scores seem quite high. And so I think what you're saying in a way is it's not only the success of your internal PR, but it's the fact that employees have kind of matched their expectations to the reality. They can't imagine, a fundamentally different way of interacting with the rest of the organization. So let's come back to the story, Bill. So you've seen this. It's frustrating to you. You're realizing that whatever we've done in the past has been not really, we haven't really slayed this thing. So how do you start to build a coalition or a sense of urgency around this? Kind of tactically, what happened?
We have a very special company, very mission focused. We have a family shareholding base. That means we're not subject to the latest whims of the hedge funds. And so we have a huge number of very committed team members, people who are making their career at Roche because they don't want to be somewhere else. And so it was really rallying that group, which is the majority of people, to say, hey, can we reimagine this? Can we imagine a place where people are able to deliver more impact for patients every day? And if that's the case, is that worth fighting for? And we heard a resounding yes. I mean, I can't believe how hard people have fought for this, and including, in some really difficult moments, because one of the things, we had to take out a lot of work. We had a lot of busy work going on. We had to take a lot of that out. When you take that out, some jobs come out. And we had people, I've had a number of times people writing letters to me saying, hey, yesterday was a very hard day for me. I found out that I've lost my job after 10 years at Roche. I love this company. I hope I'll get another opportunity to work at Roche, but no matter what, don't stop what you're doing. This is absolutely the right thing. And which is very moving to me, that people, again, I think it says a lot about the human spirit, that when you offer people an opportunity to do something great, to kind of rise above the bureaucratic mediocrity, that people are intrigued. And more than that, and the level of commitment has been really impressive.
So if I understand, Bill, you kind of started by connecting people back to the mission of improving human health and improving lives. And then it must have been a conversation about like how much of our energy is not really going to that ultimate goal? How much of our energy is feeding this beast and running the system? Did you quantify that in any way? Did you kind of look at it? Did you collect any data? But because, how did you dimensionalize the size of the problem you were up against?
First off, let me say, we really focused on two things. One is the ability to do much better for patients. The other is to create much better jobs. We just simply put, like creating awesome jobs. And we define that as end-to-end roles. Again, an opportunity where each person, like an owner, they can see a need, they can see an opportunity with a molecule or a patient need or a customer need. They can make a decision, they can act, and they can see a result. And so really our two yardsticks that have been continuous through the transformation is, are people making an impact for patients, and are the jobs getting better? Is this a more meaningful, fulfilling job? And how do we measure it? I mean, we've done a number of things over time. You mentioned this thing of people kind of getting conditioned to the system. So one thing we did is, those buttons that you push, like happy face or sad face when you're coming through the airport security check, we actually put those in at the doors to the offices in some places. Basically said, I was able to make an impact for patients today. And so it was really interesting because we saw that was pretty flat over time. We did this for, 18 months or so. It was pretty flat. But when we talked to people, it was pretty interesting. It's like their standards for what that meant increased significantly. What would have passed as making an impact? Like, for example, someone would say, oh, I spent all day in a forecast meeting, and that was important because we had to have the right forecast so that we could keep the company going. 12 months later, people would say, forecast? What does that got to do with helping a patient? How does that forecast make a patient better? And so I would say in part of the challenge is coming from our old focus on KPIs and scorecards to this new emphasis on impact, and people want to quantify it. Like, let me see the KPIs around the impact. And frankly, I think we've had to suspend that a bit and say, you know what, we'll know it when we see it, because we can't spend all our time and have people spending their lives like trying to measure whether people are making an impact.
I wanted to just pick up on what you said, Bill, that the two pillars really driving the transformation was, accountability to the patient, right? And then just being really focused and thinking of everything backwards from the patient. And the other one is ownership as a kind of bedrock principle. And I had lined this quote up from you. I think you wrote about this recently, about the importance of ownership. And you wrote that when we start with the expectation that everyone is an owner, right, that everyone has the opportunity to observe a need, an opportunity to consider, and make a decision to act, we unleash something incredibly powerful. And I would say amen to that. Ownership in our bulk humanocracy. We start with that principle because we think in a way it is the foundation of all the others. So maybe we can get a little bit more practical. Bill, can you walk us through some of the major changes you made to the structure of the company, to the processes running it, that really helped bring these kind of priorities to life? The patient centricity as well as ownership. Like, what practically were the biggest shifts that were made?
Yeah, there's a lot, but let me just mention a few. One of the starting points was leadership. What is leadership? And we said in the past, realistically, leadership was management, like command and control. Determine the goals, make sure they're cascaded, and then make sure everyone basically does their thing that they said they would do, and kind of control that. We said that is not that's not how you manage owners. In fact, owners don't need to be managed. There is a role for leadership, but it's quite different. In fact, and we benefited. I think this framework was actually developed by McKinsey, but we won't hold that against it. We said vision. Leaders set a vision. They need to architect the organization so that the organization is set up to achieve the vision. There's a role for coaching. And by the way, you can't be, when I was a manager for many years, I always heard about this coaching. I want to be a good coach. And I never got it. And I finally realized since the transformation began, the reason I could never be a coach is because you can't be a manager and a coach. You're either telling people what to do or you're not telling them what to do. And if you're not telling them what to do, then you have an opportunity to coach. But if you're basically giving them direction, you're just basically controlling them, and then being a catalyst, because some things, after you've done all that, some things will still get stuck. So that was one thing where we started, was we said, leaders, you got to stop this command and control thing. There's an important role for leaders, but that's not it. Second thing we did, we had to slay the resource allocation dragon. The budgeting is a big factor in bureaucracy. It's like, I tell someone they're empowered, but they can't spend money when they see an opportunity. They're not empowered. And if there's a budget process that says, oh, well, that's not in the budget, so you can't do it, you're not empowered. Owners don't act like that. Owners might say, oh, I don't have money in the bank, but we're not talking about money in the bank. We're talking about, I just don't have the authority to make the decision. So we created a model called the VITAL model. And essentially, we stopped budgeting in most of the company. And we said, here's how it works. You're an individual or a team. You see an opportunity. Here's how it works. Vision is, does the thing you want to do, does it align with the vision? Does it drive the vision? Second, improvement. The thing you want to invest, are you baking in improvement? Like, for example, if last year you needed to ship 100 widgets and this year you're going to ship 100 widgets, take advantage of human ingenuity and creativity. It can't take the same number of people next year that it took last year. Otherwise, you're treating humans like machines, inanimate objects that aren't capable of improving. So vision, improvement. Third, talent flow. In large bureaucracies, the talent is stuck. Why do I need 100 salespeople 5 years after the product launched when I had 100 when the product launched? It takes a lot more work to launch a product than it does to sell it 5 years later. That talent needs to move where the opportunity is. That's got to be baked in. The A in VITAL is for accountability to peers. You can fool your boss, but you can't fool your peers. So we put peers in the seat of reviewing plans or providing input on plans instead of the boss. And finally, lucidity, L. It's everyone has a right to see how things are being invested, where's the money going, and so basically we replaced we replaced a rigid, time-bound bureaucratic process of budgeting with a freedom to do what people thought was best within a framework of discipline. There you have it. So that's so those are a couple examples. we roll out operating principles to make clear what everyone is sort of accountable for in terms of behaviors. And there's a number of other things we've done, but maybe I'll stop there.
I hope you're enjoying the conversation. And I just wanted to take a moment to thank Haier for underwriting the costs of producing this interview. Haier is the world's leading appliance company and also a global leader in the Internet of Things. For the last decade, Haier has been leading a remarkable revolution in management. It is proven that even the largest, most complex organizations in the world can be entrepreneurial at their core. Now, back to our conversation. Yeah, a couple of quick follow-ups on that. So, Bill, just practically some metrics. What happened as you went through this? What happened to decision times, number of layers, number of middle managers, the size of staff groups? I mean, give us maybe some sense there, not only the culture change, but just what changed and how you're resourcing the organization.
Yeah, sure. So one example, when we got rid of budgeting, you can imagine there was some anxiety about that. Like, wow, what's going to happen to spending? And I don't know if you guys maybe know the answer, but if you don't know, let me ask you, what do you think happened to spending when we got rid of budgets?
Probably goes down. If you have real accountability, it goes down.
Yeah. It went down. By the way, we replaced the bureaucracy, but we didn't replace accountability. What we said was, instead of spending a bunch of time up front negotiating targets, which is a BS process, let's face it. It's about who's really good at negotiating targets. Instead of doing that, we said, you go and drive medical progress, you thrill customers and patients, and you take good care of company resources, and we'll talk about how you did later. So there's still the accountability, but the accountability is on the back end instead of on the front end about driving targets. So when we got rid of budgets, yeah, immediately spending dropped. Now, bureaucracy rears its ugly head, and you can get a rebound effect, and that's a whole nother story. How you really have to drive accountability to the disciplines. And I think you all know this in the companies you've studied. There's empowerment, but there's certainly accountability to principles or common processes. Within that context, you can have freedom. So it's not an easy thing to replace the bureaucracy with these sort of principles and freedom, but that's what it's felt like.
No, but I think that's the key. And for sure, one of the things we argue, and it may be more difficult to do in a pharmaceutical company than others, but we really argue that you want to move real P&Ls down as low as you possibly can. And you want, rather than creating a bunch of synthetic targets, artificial KPIs, you want people to feel like they're running something that feels like a business where you can be self-managing, you see the impact, and you can make the right decisions. And but let me go back to something you said earlier, Bill. There's so much to unpack here. I'll ask a question then back to Michele. And I hope our listeners really caught this. You said you can manage or you can coach, but you can't do both. I think that's really a profound point. And let me build on that and ask you about whether this is kind of your experience. I mean, one of the things we believe is that in most organizations, we've hopelessly confused the idea of manager and leader. And in fact, if you go back and you look at how this nomenclature changed about 20 years ago, we stopped talking about management development and we started talking about leadership development. And of course, we weren't developing leaders. We just gave management development a new title. We were still basically, this is teaching people how to be good administrators. And so how did you, because you talk I've heard you write and talk about the importance of a mindset shift. So if I'm used to being a manager, if I'm used to telling people what to do, if I believe that my salary, I'm paid to have more expertise than the people that work for me. I'm paid to make the big calls. This is what justifies my compensation. How did you guys coach, nudge, strong arm people into kind of shifting those roles? Because it doesn't at all seem natural to me. And I'm thinking that somebody who spent a lot of years learning how to be a good administrator manager, is asking like LeBron James to say, yeah, you've been really good at basketball, let's try volleyball. So how did you nurture coach people through that?
Actually, he'd probably be pretty good at volleyball. It might be like basket weaving or something might be harder. But I think it is really hard. There's not a simple answer. You have to start by modeling it at the top to say, hey, I don't know how to do this either. I mean, I was trained to be a manager, and this is a struggle. And, it helps to give people a framework so that they know what they're aiming for. So this visionary architect, catalyst, and coach, and then pulling that through in doing real leadership development. So we've put a lot of energy and investment into that. You can't just start implementing agile practices or something. I mean, you really have to start with the mindset shift and making it really clear to the senior leaders, like, hey, your job is going to change fundamentally. And if you're not up for that, this isn't the place for you. We lost very few people along the way, but we did lose a few people. And we had a few people who basically just said, I'm just not up for this. I think I'm pretty good at what I do. I can go down the street and get a great job. They'll pay me lots of money and I can do basically the same job I've been doing. And I think I'd rather do that. And frankly, I think it's better for all involved. And we tend to say, yeah, it is better for all involved. I think you guys made your point in your book. The reason bureaucracy is so sticky is because it works better than a lot of alternatives. It's much more effective than anarchy. And so these management practices that people were trained in, they're better than a lot of alternatives. They're better than being like fat and happy or lazy or undisciplined or whatever. So you really have to convince people that you start with this. And you talk to folks, and what you find out is people spend, at best, they're able to get 30 or 40% of what's in them is delivered. The rest just gets drained by the meetings and the red tape and the budget process and all that. And you basically say, do you believe there can be an organization where people can contribute 80 or 90 or 100% of what they've got in them? And if you believe that, are you willing to just do whatever it takes to get there? And that's really been the promise that we've all been operating against, and myself included. And the line between managers and leaders does not run between me and this person next to me. It runs right through the middle of each of us. I can be a bureaucratic blocking obstacle of a manager, or I can be an empowering leader that provides that vision and sets people up for great success and great jobs and great careers. And I got to get up every day and ask really hard questions about what am I doing today that is either driving the one or the other.
You said something there, Bill, that we believe that sounds like an exaggeration, but I don't think it is. But when you look at the data, which I won't rehearse all of it now, we really believe that most organizations waste more human capacity than they use. And I think, I think that's true. And what I really hear you saying, and it's not the whole story, but a huge part of it is you are shifting the loyalty of thousands of people from the process to the result, right? From the process to the patient. And that just seems to me key. But let's unpack a little bit more what you did. Michele?
Yeah. So, Bill, we wanted to do a little bit of a deep dive on the VITAL model that you mentioned earlier. And I'm so glad that you started with resource allocation, because that's the most underrated and yet most powerful, right? Either accelerant or impediment to organizational renewal, right? And most people in most organizations don't really think about it that way, right? They start with putting agile teams, at the front end and so on, only to realize, well, these teams eventually, if you really want them to be agile, they need to, shift resourcing, and that still operates in the old way, and then these things often fall apart. So I'm very, very glad that you brought that up, and you really invested that in a way as a fundamental building block of the transformation. And so I'd like to ask you first a little bit of within that model, what were the most radical kind of departure from the norm, and how do they work? So for instance, the fact that you have fluidity in talent allocation, or the fact that people could come to the bank, every day of the year as opposed to once a year, or the fact that there was peer accountability. Can you maybe give us a little bit more of an operational flavor of how those things actually worked? And then I have some questions to how you got there, but if you could just paint a picture of how this works in practice and how radical a shift it is from the status quo, I think that would be really useful.
Yeah, sure, Michele. I would highlight 3 areas that were the most revolutionary and remain the hardest things to really drive through. So vital, so vision, improve, talent flow, accountability. Let's talk about improvement, talent flow, and accountability. In improvement, it's kind of like this. We have a very supportive culture. And improvement, that's kind of hard. It's kind of like saying, hey, hey team, great job accomplishing such and such task with 5 people. Next year, you need to accomplish it with 4. That sounds kind of harsh, right? That's really mean. We have to change the way we think about that. Again, it's like in Switzerland, where I spend most of the year, we live very close to the zoo. And the zoo, there's a lovely zoo in Basel, and they have gorillas. And the gorillas have these little puzzles they have to work to get their food. But you know what? It's the same puzzle year after year. I mean, gorillas are gorillas. People can figure stuff out. If you need 4 people to accomplish the task instead of 5, they will figure it out. And what we do is we say, oh, in the name of being nice, we're not going to be demanding, but we need to be demanding of ourselves. Not that we don't want people working harder. We don't want people working longer. We want to enable people to figure out better ways of doing things. Second, talent flow. Like you have back to that example, 5 people on the team. Well, which one has got to go? And when I say go, I don't mean leave the company. I mean, go do something else useful. Right? Yeah, but we all like each other. And who's going to tell the person they have to, it's kind of this, it's socially awkward, but it stands in the way of people really achieving their full potential. Because what we know is we have tons of new medicines. We have tons of scientific ideas that need people. So we need that person to go do that. And so we've got to get over that sort of social inhibition or that belonging behavior. And then finally, this accountability. I was a manager for many years. I was pretty good at the game. You go to the staff meeting and you argue for your resources, and you don't actually have to fool your peers. You just have to fool your boss. You just when you turn it and make it a peer thing, it's not like the boss can leave the room, and there's only so many resources, and the peers have got to figure it out. Like, what is the right allocation of resources? And I would say, again, that one, people don't always like that because it's harder to work it out with your peers. There's no BS. There's no gaming, because you can't fool your peers. They know what's going on. They know what your resources are. It's connected. It gets worked out. But these are things that are countercultural. And they take some work.
Yeah. Can you maybe talk a little bit about that process of peer review or peer calibration? So how does that actually work in practice? Do people do new initiatives get posted for everyone to see, and then there's a panel of people that judges whether those ideas are good or not, or pushes back, or asks for more, or like the mechanics would be quite interesting to understand if you could unpack them a little bit.
It differs according to we have countries with 10 people, and we have countries with 10,000 people. So the scale of things, we have R&D, we have manufacturing, we have sales and marketing. So the practices differ, but and by the way, you have to be careful because you don't want to create a peer bureaucracy, right? You're not trying to replace one kind of constraints or unhelpful constraints with another. So, it takes some engineering in each situation. But generally, we do is we get an operating group and you say, how are we going to do this, and what is the way to get peer accountability? And they have to kind of figure out what is the natural size of group, and so but it is really interesting, the first time you do it, and people are kind of like, but then people settle in and they get it. It's like, okay, this is the new normal. It's not about convincing the boss.
So let's explore a couple of other changes you made. I know that you'd been critical of kind of the over specialization of roles. We kind of divided jobs up into such narrow, things that they weren't very interesting. So how did you think about creating more interesting work for people?
Yeah. Well, one of the things we did in the initial diagnostic phase, I told you about those 10 years where we were bureaucracy busting and things were only getting worse. Interesting. While we were bureaucracy busting with all kinds of initiatives, right, to shrink process, unbeknownst to anyone, we actually doubled the number of positions in the company. Not number of people, but the number of distinct roles. So in fact, if you think about it that way, we were in the same business 10 years later than we had been, at the beginning, but we had doubled the number of positions, which basically means, if you think about it, we cut every job in half just in one decade.
Wait, just a minute. Like, who's doing this? Who are the people who are creating all these new job descriptions? Like, how? Like, that doesn't happen like, by magic. How? Like, why?
Actually, it happens like gravity. It's like entropy. Nobody thought, hey, let's cut all our jobs in half. Basically, individual managers thought, hey, you know what? We've got a person. We've got a person who's selling to doctors and nurses. Wouldn't it be great to have people who were really in focus with the nurses? So why don't we create a nurse salesperson and a doctor salesperson, right? In manufacturing, you do the same thing. We have people that are specialists at this part of the process, and people that are specialists in that part of the process. It's this whole idea of the finite abilities of humans. And of course we are finite. Like, I can't dunk a basketball, but I can learn something new. Probably nothing to do with sports, but I can learn some new concept. Instead, we in large organizations, we relentlessly chop things into smaller pieces. So you asked, what do we do about it? So we just started to say, hey, let's turn this around two ways. One is, what does a customer want? As an example, it could be you could fill in the blank. What does a molecule want? What does a process want? But I'll use the example of a customer. What does a customer really want? Do they really want a different person in their office to talk to nurses, and want someone else to talk to doctors, someone else to talk to the accountant, someone else to help with patient insurance issues? Or do they really just want one person from our company that can help them with everything? Because what happens is, when you have the jobs all split up, guess what? The right person is never there at the right time. It's like someone comes in and they say, oh, hey, I have a question with this. Oh, well, that's my colleague so-and-so. Oh, well, how about this? I have a question with this. No, well, that's my other colleague. We said, rather than focus from the company out, where it was like, oh, I want people that are experts, let's talk about what the customer really wants. They don't need somebody who's necessarily super expert in everything or anything. They need someone who can help them in general. And so we said, let's start with that customer or the mission element, the molecule, and then second, let's make end-to-end jobs. As I said, it can't be like this is not an automobile factory where we're chopping up the jobs in little pieces. I don't know if that's the right answer in an automobile factory, but it's not.
And what's an end-to-end job? How do you define an end-to-end job?
Basically, I can observe, say, a need or an opportunity. I can think about ways of satisfying that need or opportunity. I can make a decision about that. I can get the resources. I can spend the money. I can do it, and I get to see the result and maybe improve on that. That's end to end.
Yeah. So that really is somebody who has kind of ownership over that issue, that challenge, whatever it is. So a related question. what happened to HR throughout all of this? I think I had read somewhere that you did a lot of work kind of changing how you think about kind of people management. Can you comment on that for a moment? Because, in most organizations, HR has been the fastest growing staff group. And yet, if you look historically, like really low levels of satisfaction from business people across the organization. So, I think they've been under a lot of pressure and maybe not adding a lot of value. I don't know, but how did that change for Roche Pharmaceuticals?
Well, I think our HR group, which in the meantime changed their name to People and Culture, I think in part as a recognition of what needed to happen, but they went from administering the old system, like really being expert at sort of keeping track of all these different job profiles and also a lot of the extraneous or the extrinsic motivators, the detailed bonus system, the all the stuff that I mentioned, that we were really good at kind of persuading people that they were empowered, even if they weren't empowered, to very much mode of supporting transformation, supporting the development of leaders and the mindset changes. I mean, it's definitely been a very busy time for our human resources professionals, but the nature of their job has changed a lot.
Again, reading some of what you've shared with your organization, Bill, you talked about, when you were a young person going, embarking on a career, you had, I think, as most people do, and in fact, you said it this way, you said you had imbibed, like most people, a dualistic concept of work and life, where these things are very, very separate. And you said, at work, I didn't expect to form deep, lifelong friendships. I didn't expect, quotes, to shout for joy. I didn't expect to be overcome with wonder or to fall out of my chair laughing. So yeah, that's right. I mean, we come to work, we put on the mask, we're our professional selves, we leave a lot of humanity at home. Has that changed at Roche? And was that just a natural outcome of simplifying processes, getting bureaucracy out of the way, creating more expansive roles, getting people connected with mission? Did it become more of a community and more true with more humanity, or did you have to work on that problem specifically on its own?
Yeah, I don't think we've really fully answered that yet, Gary. I think that these modes that we're trained in, they die hard, and I think part of what we hope to do in rehumanizing work, for example, with these end-to-end roles and with true empowerment, is to bring out more of that humanity. That it's sort of like if you have a job that is dehumanizing, then it's almost automatic that you're gonna be in a different mode when you're in that job. It's like, as you said, that's where you put on your mask. You turn down yourself and you turn up your whatever, performing that task. And certainly when you make people owners, you tap into a deep part of their person, the spirit and the soul that is different than people who are just coming and doing the thing that they've been tasked to do. And I think what we hope to see with that is a creation of a more vibrant community. I mean, we have a wonderful supportive culture, as I mentioned, and people are genuinely like each other. But people haven't always had to challenge each other, because everyone can kind of stay in their swim lane. When you take the lane ropes out and you empower people, you create the opportunity for more creativity, but you also create opportunity for conflict. And so, that's got to get worked through. And so we know we have to build even a stronger community, because it's like one level of community that's required if everybody's just being nice. It's another level if people are deeply committed to change and to owning, and then I can't just be nice. I'm going to be nice too, but I got to drive some change. I got to drive something new. I got to get out of the zone I'm in and that can create conflict. And so we've got to gear up for that.
Yeah, I mean, if you're not careful, community can kind of degenerate just into niceness, and you end up kind of with a collective mediocrity. And so, these are performance-oriented communities, but nevertheless, I think it's a pretty fundamental change when you feel like I'm going to work and I can bring all of who I am there. And in most organizations, we know that's still not the case.
One of the things I wanted to ask you, Bill, is that you laid out some pretty substantial changes to resource allocation and to how you conceive of roles and decision rights. Now, how did these initially come about? Were they just products of your imagination and your creative thinking, or did they surface somewhere else in the organization? And how were they first experimented with or implemented? Because you could imagine people saying, "Wait a minute, Bill, you want to get rid of budgets? Chaos will ensue. Like, how do we make sure we do this in a way that doesn't blow up the organization?" So, could you speak to both of those questions?
I'd say it was a combination of some external inspiration. There were some guides like Reinventing Organizations by Lelou. There were some people that we met in our travels, that had done some different things. So, for example, I was able to ask a few people who had gone to non-traditional budgeting approaches before I pushed the button on the first experiment of wiping out budgets, because that was a little nerve-wracking, and they said, guess what? Spending will go down initially. Now you got, like I said, we could have a whole discussion about resource allocation, but there was some external inspiration, and then there was a lot of wandering in the wilderness. Very uncomfortable leadership team sessions where, because again, in the old mode, in the bureaucratic mode, it's action focused. A lot of those actions are BS bureaucracy actions, but they're actions. Like you have an 8-hour meeting with the leadership team and you reviewed and approved lots of stuff. And so you have a feeling of progress. In a new mode where we're not command and control, and it's like architecting, whoa, you have a lot of meetings where you have 8 hours of discussion. And at the end of the 8 hours, there's no action plan. It's kind of like, oh, well, we kind of wandered in the wilderness. We figured out what we're not going to do, but we didn't quite get to what we need to do. We got to come back tomorrow. And that was very uncomfortable. And some people were, not very happy with that. It's kind of like, they're driving home and they're used to being able to say, what did I get done today? And what did I get done today? Like wandering in the wilderness, trying to figure out new ways of working that are not bureaucratic, that somehow that didn't always check the box. So, and as to the inspiration was from all different directions. I'll tell you one quick story on this killing the budgets. What happened was when we were starting this transformation work, we did charter some small teams to evaluate certain topics and come up with ideas. So we had one team on the budget, right? And they went off and they came up with some ideas and they brought it back to the leadership team. And basically we said, nah, it's still bureaucratic. It's still not empowering. Right. So they went back again and then they came back with some new other ideas. We're going to cut the time frame. We're going to have different people reviewing, whatever. And it was in that meeting, it was like the light bulb went off. It was like, there is no way out of this. We have to stop this. You can't solve your way within a budget process out of the bureaucratic nature of a budget process. You have to stop it and do something totally different. And so that was an example, though. But again, pretty frustrating, right? If you're on the team that's trying to figure out the new, better budget process and you go at it twice and both times it gets rejected, it's kind of like, oh, well, what did I accomplish? But what they did accomplish was great because they tested the bounds of what could be done. We had great thinkers. They came up with great ideas. They just weren't good enough. And so it was based on their work that we had the confidence to kill budgeting because we said, this can't be done. So we're not going to do it.
It's interesting, Bill. I just think that's like a fantastic insight there because we've inherited all of these systems, right? I mean, they were there when most of us came to work, and most consultants and others and compliance people will all tell us we need all of these things. And so when you're asking people to reimagine the organization, there is going to be a fair amount of fumbling, right? It's not like when you take all this out, like what else happens? And so I think what you're saying there is so important that you have to recognize that. You have to recognize there's not like some plug and play. It's not like we pull this out and there's some ready-made thing we're just going to put in. We're going to have to invent this. We're going to have to figure it out. And that means as leaders, we have to go, into this role of being social architects. We have to think about, well, like how else do we do this? And how can we, and being able to live over a potentially a long period of months with a kind of seemingly endless set of puzzles you have to solve where there's no obvious answer. That's a very uncomfortable, I think, situation for a lot of people. But I don't know of any other way, right? And so thank you for kind of just describing that. One of the things you also have emphasized as you've written about some of this is the need for mindset change, which is a really easy thing to talk about. But if you could identify maybe just one or two, what were the most difficult kind of pre-existing mindsets that needed to be dislodged or changed, and how did you do that?
I think there's the one that's the biggest is you're really asking people, senior managers. And I'm using that word intentionally. I mean, we're talking about CEOs, executive committee members, right? Who got where they got by being very adept at managing the old system. And you're asking them to basically dismantle the house that made them, which requires, I mean, I'm literally going through this right now with my leadership team. We're all recognizing like, hey, we all grew up in this system. We're not there yet. We've got more to go. We've been on it for 5 years. We've been we've been deeply immersed in this, and we realize we still have the capability of just of backsliding and of having too many bureaucratic things that are still present. So that's just to say, and by the way, that's where you just lose a lot of people. I mean, I've got an incredibly, the culture at our company, it's very, it's a challenging, like we're pretty comfortable with vulnerability or saying, hey, we're kind of a humble culture that way. It's okay to be wrong. It's okay to admit mistakes. If you're in a culture where it's not okay to be wrong or admit mistakes, I don't know how you could even start this kind of transformation. It's realizing that the very things that made the leaders get to their place is the thing that's wrong in the organization and needs to be changed.
Yeah, that's a very, very tough realization. One of the arguments we make in Humanocracy is that the process of kind of debureaucratizing has to start with you as a manager, as a leader. And it doesn't mean you can't work on other things in parallel, but we kind of created this like little index, or this I should say it's like a little maybe assessment where you ask yourself, where am I acting out of that old bureaucratic model, right? Where am I sacrificing my values for expediency? Where am I kind of elbowing a rival out of the way? Where am I holding on to power where I should be giving it away? Where have I failed to challenge a bullshit kind of rule? And our advice is, and we lay this out in some detail, a whole set of questions like, where am I operating out of that old model every day? And then you go to your team and you say, guys, you got to hold me accountable for this. Like when you see these things, these very specific items, like come and challenge me and say why. and then getting leaders themselves to hold each other accountable. But I think, that's so ingrained. We've described bureaucracy as this massive multiplayer game that's played for the stakes of positional power. And the people who are good at it have learned a very deep set of behaviors about how you win. And, so it's a deprogramming effort, exactly as you're describing.
Maybe we can think about now, or try to extract some lessons from your experience that might be applicable to other CEOs who want to follow in your footsteps. They want to, energize, rejuvenate the organization, and infuse the spirit of ownership and customer centricity or patient centricity in pharma. So, what advice would you have for these leaders, like, that really want to uproot bureaucracy as opposed to kind of mowing the lawn, right? And having bureaucracy spring back up in 3 years' time? Like, what practical suggestions would you have for them?
I mean, first I would just say is, don't even go there unless you're willing to, upend your life. It's just, I've had this discussion so many times with our leaders who just say how their brain hurts sometimes because, there's so much sort of type 2 thinking involved. I mean, it's so much easier to just turn the corporate crank. Every year is a little bit like like every year there's something different in the market. There's something different with the product. There's something different with customers. There's something different, right? But the processes are all the same. The budget process, the people process, the blah, blah, right? That's so much easier to just turn that crank. When you say, actually, that crank is the thing that's holding us back, and we got to reinvent the way we do everything, you just signed up for a world of work and a world of disruption. And so because if you go at it halfway, it's going to fail, and people will be more disillusioned than they are. Just don't. It's better that you didn't even try. Second, if you are really committed and convicted, then you gotta own it. Like, forget outsourcing it. You can't create some team on the side that's responsible for it. So, for example, when we started this, we created a transformation team, not in place of the leadership team, but as an extender for the leadership team, because the leadership team was spending probably 16 hours a week on transformation. And we couldn't afford more than that, but we knew we had to pick up the pace. So we needed a group of really trusted, bright leaders who could be basically working on it 50 or 60 hours a week while we were working on it 16 hours a week. We were meeting with them for like 8 hours a week. You can't outsource this. And when I say a week, I'm talking about for years, not like 6 months. This is, you don't even, when you go into it, you don't know when it's going to end. It's so-called emergent change process. You don't know how long the timeline lasts. You don't know what the process is going to look like. You have some idea of what, you're going to end up with an organization where people act like owners, where people have better jobs, where customers have their needs met in a much more clear and tangible. You can see a vision of the future, but how you get there, you have no idea what that looks like when you start, and you got to be okay with that. And then you better ask for some help. You better talk to people who've been doing this, because as I said, we had external inspiration and a lot of internal wandering in the wilderness. You're going to need both. But man, heaven help you if you try to do it all on your own and you don't get some help.
You're describing, we've asked ourselves often, and by the way, we have some technology and tools. We think you can accelerate this. It doesn't have to be half of a decade. Having said that, it takes a lot of time. And you're describing a task that I think most leaders instinctively shy away from. Because what you've said, I think of all like almost a three-dimensional, like a cube here, space. You're saying, one, it's not short term, it's long term. So, rather than putting your attention on how do I get how do I pop the share price? You got to be in it for a while. And so that means perseverance and patience, which is not always a strong suit in organizations. We tend to blame it on shareholders, but often it's just the attention span of the leadership team. So one, you're saying like you're in it for the long haul. The second thing you're saying is it's going to be systemic. Ultimately, you change everything. It's not a silver bullet. It's not one tweak, but you got to really it's complex. It's systemic, and you got to be able to work many, many, many layers. So not only do you have to have a patience, it's just the sheer systemic complexity of what you're trying to do. And then the last thing you're saying is, and there's not necessarily a really easily defined endpoint, right? That you can't always see the end from the beginning. So ambiguity, complexity, and patience, you could argue that's exactly the kinds of things leaders need to take on. That should be what CEOs and others do. And yet, we probably all of us kind of naturally shy away from challenges where those things are true.
It's true. Let me just say, because at the end of this little dialogue we just had, you could say, well, is it worth it, right? And here I would say the good news is we saw results immediately. Now, we didn't fix everything and change everything immediately, but we did see results immediately. Second, we had results that were not possible before. So, for example, we've been working for a decade on reducing our filing timelines. It's a huge task to file with the regulators for new drug approvals. And so this is a massive undertaking. In the old days, before we had disk drives, we literally sometimes would be loading like a semi truck with files to go in the file. Okay. So this is a massive undertaking. We had been working for a decade to reduce the timelines. And when we've implemented these new ways of working in terms of empowering teams to make decisions and such, we managed over about a 4-year period to drop the timelines in half, from 26 weeks to like 13 weeks. Again, we had been trying to do that before. We couldn't do it. Now we did it. In manufacturing, we had massive improvements in productivity. And I could give other examples. So we were able to do that. We also did things that, again, we didn't have cost-cutting programs. Before we would have a cost-cutting program. We haven't had a cost-cutting program, but we've had a lot of cost-cutting. So again, these are things that wouldn't have been imaginable before, but literally costs just sort of falling out of the system when you empower people, when you give people decision-making authority. So there's a payoff, and you don't have to wait 5 years for the payoff. So you got to be prepared for a long haul, but there are rewards along the way.
Yeah, that's definitely our experience.
Yeah, there are no shortcuts to creating competitive advantage, right? And what you described, Bill, is essentially research and development and even commercialization of technology. It's an organizational technology, right? But you wouldn't expect technology development that is cutting edge to be easy, right? But as you say, if you do it, there are real payoffs, and it does give you an enduring advantage, right? So I hope, and I think people will instinctively get that, right? And we'll get more executives to see this is the way to sustain progress and performance. But let me, I don't know, Gary, do you have any other questions or?
Yeah, the one thing I would just like to ask in conclusion, Bill, is how has this journey changed you?
I think it's given me a whole new growth outlook. I think honestly, when I came into this job, I thought at that point I had been managing in corporations for about 25 years. And I thought I pretty much had it figured out. And honestly, it was like starting over again as a baby. And just that realization of like, you might think when you think you know, you don't know. And I have to say, again, there's a tremendous excitement in our company. I see it at all kinds of in different positions, different departments, different kind of levels in the organization. People are excited that, hey, there is something new to learn and a way to grow, and the potential for our mission is immeasurable. But the potential for our people to, just be excited about their jobs and experience those things you mentioned, like joy, and to be just totally psyched at what they're doing. That Sunday nights are great because they get to look forward to going back to work on Monday. That's worth fighting for. And so I would say the idea that I'm going to arrive at some point, that's gone from my mind. I hope I'll keep learning and growing and until, as long as I've got breath and opportunity to contribute.
One of our hypotheses, and maybe we can end here, and you can either confirm or deny, and it's good either way. We'll be happy to get your view on this. But, one of our hypotheses is that going on this journey, you will never have the courage to tackle the difficult things. You'll never have the patience and so on. If you start with primarily a utilitarian goal in mind, right? We're going to reduce administrative overhead. We're going to shorten times, whatever. But you really start by saying, we're going to give everybody a chance to flourish. We're going to create a place where people can bring their very best. That it has to be kind of that more almost ethical, human desire that keeps you going when things are tough. Is that a fair hypothesis?
I think so, particularly for a mature company. I mean, maybe in a startup, you could create some really efficient model from the get-go and just keep it. But if you're an established company and you've got to overturn the bureaucracy, boy, you got to have something keeping you going. And it can't be, we're going to increase the stock price by 20%, or we're going to be number one in market share. I mean, it's got to be more than that, or it's not worth it. There's got to be an easier way to achieve those things.
Well, Bill, you've been so generous with your time. I think we'll end it here. I found this conversation incredibly illuminating and quite instructive, because we got both in the sort of like the conceptual part of it, but also the very practical aspects of the transformation and the personal aspects of the transformation for you and your colleagues. So thanks again for all your insights and the inspiration. And we look forward to hearing more about your continued progress, because as you said, you haven't reached the end point yet. So I'm sure there's a lot more that you'll be able to teach us about in the coming years. So thanks again.
Many thanks, Michele. Thanks, Gary. And look forward to continuing the dialogue.